Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundless success to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and I'm Bill Correll. I am here with my main buddiette, and I lovingly refer to her as my twin, Jan Jeremias. And we are so ready to put let me see here, put a bow on the top of 2024, kiss it goodbye, and grab 2025 and slap it on the butt and tell it to get busy getting here, right?
Yeah, I agree. I was reflecting on sort of like, the last few months have been quite challenging. So what was really great about 2024? Like what could I say? I don't like to use the word success or like accomplishment. Even those sound like too what I call like business terms, like what were the growth? What was the growth that happened? What happened that was like amazing? And I was sitting there, and one of them was us both being in a book. So that to me was this hugely, I don't know, amazing kind of adventure and growth opportunity. The fact that I'm now contributing on another book. And so I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like the fact that now all of a sudden whatever it is, I feel like I've owned whatever it is and I'm ready to share it, or comfortableness with that being out there in the world,
Yes.
whatever it might be. And so, yeah, so I was thinking about the things that went really well. I mean, obviously, things that don't go well are always an opportunity to learn. But, I feel like, at least in my life, I dwell on the negative too much. So I really wanted to kind of shift my perspective a little bit to
Yeah.
realize, like, okay, get a grip, honey, what went right? Like kind of idea.
Well, there's nothing Pollyannish about that. If you have a bad day, your best days are still coming. So if you can just focus on um, reframing, rebroadcasting, changing your state of mind, these are all things that you and I can do. But sometimes, we forget that.
I equate absolutely, Bill. I equate it to like, when I have all these tools in my toolbox of like what to do, let's say for physical pain, especially. So let's say I have a headache. I know I'm supposed to grab my peppermint oil, which really helps. So it's every now and then, and my mother, I'll say I have a headache, and my mother will like, and I'll like even forget. And my mother will say to me, "Did you use your peppermint?" And it always makes me laugh because here she is, I'm the essential oil person, and she's reminding me. But I think that that's why we go through, I always say that's why I feel like I go through challenging times, because I've forgotten. It's like, I forget, all the positives, or I take them for granted, or it's like the fact that you don't really treasure people until like all of a sudden they're not speaking to you, or or it doesn't even have to be a negative. It could be like they're incognito and they've taken a break from technology. Like I have a friend in China, in Hong Kong, who put out an announcement that he's going on like a technology detox retreat, and so he won't be connected for the next like 5 days or something. And
Yeah.
so it's like all of a sudden when you don't have something, you realize how important it is to you.
Yeah.
Uh,
sometimes the noticing what's missing is harder than noticing what's loud, you know? But there's
Absolutely.
that inside feeling that basically says there's something that's not the way it has been, and can't quite put my finger on it. Um, and sometimes it can be very disconcerting. It can really take away from a good moment. Um, it's amazing to me how many people. So I'm just going to act as if a lot of people have told me in the last 2 or 3 months that they have ADD. Now, I find that interesting.
Mhm.
And I almost wonder um, if it's if it's self-diagnosed, then it's worth what you paid to get the diagnosis. Uh, but and if you are a person who's prone to being distracted, that not necessarily is it a distraction disorder. It could just be you're an intelligent person whose brain is firing, and coming up with different questions as you're going through life. And to me, that's kind of wonderful. What I really enjoyed, though, is I was at a meeting this morning, this with this beautiful woman. She's absolutely fantastic. She's gotten to be a pretty good friend since COVID. She came out to my place during COVID, and she bought some stuff from me to resell in her antique store. And then I just lost track of her for 2 years. But all of a sudden, she was like doing one of these looking around in space for a moment. She said, sometimes when my brain gets overwhelmed, I start just going away. And I said, I love that you said that. And I said, is that something that you'd feel comfortable with sharing with just everybody? And she said, not in particular. But for me, that's like my goal in life, is to be that guy that folks can just be themselves with. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Ab-
okay. Take a chance.
Absolutely. But I love what you said, Bill, because it makes me think when you say that so many people that you've been speaking to say they have something. And
Yes.
no matter what that is. And I kind of sit and wonder, I'm like, is it the fact that now it's become such like a buzzword to say? And it's kind of like an excuse for distraction. It's like, oh, I have ADD or ADA, whatever. I can't, or is it the fact that people are self diagnosing based on, whatever's out there that they've read? And it just kind of makes me really interested. I was listening to somebody who was talking about sleep, and he was saying that he said, I feel like somebody, like, all of a sudden we have the sleep police,
Right.
where like if you don't get 7 or 8 hours of sleep, like you're gonna get some like illness or something. And he said, I can't get, there are nights I can't get 7 or 8 hours. He has like a medical condition he named or whatever. And he's like, it's not happening. But he said, I don't know if it helps us. Like he said, yes, sleep is important. And I'm not saying that. He said, but I don't think it helps people to sit there and then get into this mode like, oh my gosh, I only got 8 hours of sleep or 7 hours or 5 hours or 4 hours. And now I'm terrified that I'm going to end up with some sort of health condition or mental disorder or cognitive decline because I've all of a sudden, I'm not getting that amount. And I kind of wonder what happens when as a, like, let's say as a, well, I don't know, as a voice, let's say, because I don't really know where that, let's say, that voice necessarily comes from, whether it's from media, the health professionals, both, or pharmaceutical, I don't know.
Right.
But I kind of wonder when a voice kind of has that one kind of message that they're constantly sending out, and people don't have the, I want to say, wherewithal to kind of question and get curious about it,
Yeah.
then what happens? Like, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, like you said, like maybe their neurons are firing all at once, or maybe they're going through a creative spurt where all of a sudden that creativity is really flowing, or maybe they got a great night's sleep last night, and so all the brain cells are kind of firing really really sharply as opposed to when they're exhausted. But kind of makes me nervous when so many people all of a sudden sort of self-proclaim, for example, like that they have something.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with you that most of them are using it as a convenient excuse and permission to continuously do it anyway without, really having any commitment to listening what's going on. I, I prided myself 30 years ago being able to not pay attention to a damn word that the person in front of me was saying, and then all of a sudden, a few minutes later, repeat back to them exactly what they said, the last 4 or 5 sentences verbatim. I wasn't listening, but I had the recall that I could bring that back up again and say, yeah, you just said, blah, 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 blah. And I go, yeah, but what were you doing while you were not listening to me? But now you recall it. And I said, well, I don't know. I've worked hard for this skill. And it's not something that's really impressive because it's a parlor trick, really. And what I finally realized was it was not important for me to have the thoughts I was having when there was another human being sitting in front of me pouring their heart out at me. You know, there's there's blessed work to be done on this planet, and it's
Hmm.
almost none of it is worrying about the past, or being anxious about the future.
Well, and I think that what you're saying, Bill, is like, as you said, like when the person is sitting in front of you, it's more important to focus on them
Yep.
and take the focus off of you,
Right.
per se. And so when you're sitting there, even if you will have the ability to quote verbatim what they just said to you, which let's say I don't have that skill, but let's say I did. There is this element of it's not only repeating back to somebody what they said, is somebody knows when they've been hurt or not. Like there is this sense that somebody has, like, oh my gosh, this person really understood what I was saying. And if they didn't, they're still there and they're listening, like there is this element, whether it be body language or something else that comes across, like an energy that actually happens
Yeah.
when someone is attentive.
Yeah. I completely love that. And yes, I do believe that there's a major distinction between hearing and listening. And listening is so much more powerful because it's an action verb. It's not passive at all. It's like, give it all you've got, to be a good partner, in this conversation, and not just waiting your turn to speak, but really kind of taking on board um, what's being proposed in the conversation. What does it mean? What does it mean to the person who's speaking? There's just so many layers and levels that you can't just superficially be able to hear something and keep it in that outer circle of orbits, where it doesn't actually get down inside. I think part of that might have been just a defense mechanism.
Hmm.
I
Well, I
mean,
think, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
no worries. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say part of it, I think, is because I think when we listen to somebody and let's say it triggers something in us, let's say, especially if they're going through, it's like I've used the example before that when I got divorced, the last thing I wanted to relive was my divorce. So, but everybody came and spoke to me about their divorce. So it caused me to revisit things in myself that I really didn't want to visit. So I think when someone's in conversation with you or sharing something with you, there are points where something they says really hits you on a very deep level
Yeah.
because all of a sudden it might be a relived experience for you depending on what they're going through. If they are having problems with their kids and you had problems with your kids, whatever it is, all of a sudden it's like sometimes I think it's hard for us, and nor should we, because I think it makes us empathetic people and compassionate people. Is it's hard for us to separate ourselves from a situation, and the question is like, how much do you let that play in? Like, do you let the person feel heard, and so you're not just automatically jumping in to share something from your own experience and almost not letting them have enough of a voice to kind of get whatever they wanted off their chest? Or are you able to kind of keep your mouth shut and not let the words go out, which I'm still working on, and allow the person to actually and still have that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I really understand what they're going through.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot, to really be considerate of, in every situation where someone's expressing themselves. And we used to have a one of our interpersonal skills training exercises was a thing called "and then what?" Okay, and it was just basically training at constantly being able to set aside whatever thoughts you're having until the person in front of you stops speaking. And the only thing that you can say during this 10-minute exercise is, and then what? And
Mhm.
it's kind of a refreshing thing to realize that you're going to be a tag team partner here, but you're not going to be able to say anything yourself that's new and original for 10 whole minutes. And it gets to the point where by the 13th or 14th time you say, and then what? Where both of you are just giggling and looking at each other, busting up. But the whole idea is that it breaks down completely, like you said, the need to share your own experience that was like what you think you're hearing from them.
Right. And I think there's no, like I said, I think that we do that almost. I think as human beings, we do that anyway, even if we don't voice it, because I think we relate and remember something based on our own experience and, and my ability to relate to what you're saying. And that's how I'm going to remember it. But so I think it's almost automatic that we do that. But the question is how long do you attach to your own story when you're listening to somebody else? So, like, you say something and that triggers within me something, but how much do I let that carry me away from the conversation so that I become focused on myself versus listening to you? So, and I think it's very nuanced. Like, I mean, I think that it is a skill you learn. It's like,
Yes.
okay, yeah, that reminds me of this, but like go back to like bring your attention back to Bill, like or whoever it is sitting across from you or on the phone, And so how much can you almost like keep like like someone who has a dog that's visually impaired, like keep guiding somebody back to like yourself back really to the conversation versus get distracted by your own story when you're in conversation with someone else.
Yeah, and I think that there's a motivation behind that. And if you're real interested in doing something like that, I mean, the most fundamental training is don't make yourself bad and wrong about going away. When you notice you've gone away, just come back. You know,
I,
no
I've
need.
actually
Yeah,
I've actually started doing that in
yeah,
conversations. Like where if I get distracted, I'll say to myself, "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Where I used to feel very uncomfortable doing that. And but now I'm just like, okay, I got distracted, my mind wandered. I was thinking about something else. Like, could you repeat that, please?
yes, yeah.
And
There's
I
a
think, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we were gonna.
Well, see, there's a remarkable thing that we human beings do, and of course, we all believe that we're the only ones that ever does anything, right? Um, we're less than likely to give ourselves credit for doing something well or right, and we're real quick on picking up the stones when we're pretty sure we just did something bad or wrong. And the neat part of it is that if you can train yourself to be aware and to be mindful, so that you've got choices, this whole notion of listening to yourself listen, if you become really adept at that, and if your commitment is to always be increasing the relationship with the person that you're with, um, there's good raw material there for having really great conversations that don't get derailed quite as frequently as most people experience, like when we run out of things to say.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the last time I ran out of things to say, or the person with me ran out of things to say.
Mm-hmm. Not to say that I do think there's great quality in being able to be with someone and not say anything. Like, I think
Yeah.
that there is some real value in um in being able to sit in the presence of someone and not feel obligated to speak.
Yeah.
Um, not to fill air basically. Like I call it. It's like, it's like just noise basically because, and I'm not saying that that's, you know, I have sound on a lot in my house, whether that be music or something. But there is this element, but also I do have routines definitely where my like it is silent
Yeah.
because I practice and I don't listen to anything, whatever, except for like the natural sounds in my house or, the sound of my breath. But I don't really, you know, I but I have the ability to tune in, what I call tune in. It's like turning on the tuner of an old radio, like it's like tuning in the dial a little bit. We're getting back to our generation a little bit more there, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the Timothy Leary saying, turn on, tune in, and drop out.
Drop out, right. And but I love the way you said that listening is an action word because I was looking up, I was talking on Friday in my audio event about intentions for
Hmm.
the new year. I don't do resolutions. I do intentions or words for my year. And I was thinking that, if you look at intention, it comes from the same root word as attention. To tend, meaning that you need to kind of nurture that intention, which is what it made me think of, like to tend a garden.
Yep.
And it's not a passive act, it's not passive, it's active to tend to place your attention on something. And it was really, I always choose words for the year because I don't do resolutions and I don't even really set that many intentions kind of thing. It's much more like a deeper kind of, you know, I was laughing because my friend chose the word fly, which was my word a few years ago. And I said to her, "Oh, that was my word about 3 or 4 years ago." And she said, "Yeah, it was such an interesting word." And I said, "And that's the year I moved." And so all of a sudden she was like, "Oh."
Yeah. There are consequences.
Exactly.
Intentions have consequences.
Exactly, exactly. But I love this whole idea because, in that communication of active listening, I guess my question, and that's how we in some ways how we began about that kind of like sort of like refinement or discernment of like, why you feel distracted. Like, do you look at that and get curious about it? Was like, how do we listen to ourselves? And based on that, how do we speak to ourselves?
This is, not necessarily something that people give a lot of thought to, simply because, excuse me, it's not a natural thinking pattern, for people to accept responsibility that there's something going on inside of your head, but it's not you. What if it's not you? What if what's going on in your head is like a ping pong ball that got stuck in there at some time in the past? It's gotten jarred loose and now it's banging around inside your head and it's not you. I think what really drives people batty is the resisting and fighting with the thoughts that they're having, either denying that, that they're valid. But the way that we're talking about listening to another human being, we could be that compassionate for ourselves too. And if you think about it for a moment, the acceptance and validation and just allowing, a person to be however they are in this moment, whatever that is, there's really nothing better, as a human being to just be at peace with, this is just who I am right now for this moment.
Yeah, I've been, for me, and I consider, and I say work, but not work in a negative way. It's something that I'm very aware of, trying to show up as I show up lately.
Yeah.
And so basically showing up as me, no matter, and so, but I think that's a hard place for us to be. In general, I think people find it hard. Let me just say that in
Yep.
general, because they feel like they have some sort of image or some sort of part to play, and they're fearful, I guess, of what would happen if they kind of put down or allowed themselves to be human, you know, and and I'm not saying that you don't, like, you're not responsible for what you do. You are. You're just allowing yourself to be a human being versus being some sort of idea of what you think a human being should be.
Again, one of those areas that I think a lot of people have not given it much thought. That's that old saying about an unexamined life not being worth living. If you examine your life from the standpoint of understanding and compassion, um, there's all this possibility for upgrade and for really getting a lot more out of life in terms of the juice that's present that you normally are just walking past and not picking up.
Yeah, I love that because I think that, when I first started practicing yoga, I always said I don't know that I was prepared because all of a sudden the great experiences became even better and the negative experiences became so much more intense.
Yeah.
And I think that's because I was truly living them.
Yeah.
I wasn't kind of, I don't know, I wasn't surface living. You know what I mean? The troughs became really big troughs and the peaks became really big peaks. And so all of a sudden it was like, and I don't think I was prepared at all because I thought to myself, I'm going to go and learn a whole bunch of yoga poses and a whole bunch about yoga philosophy, and I would leave. And then afterwards, thinking to myself, because it was so shocking to me, was like, how do I go back to who I was before? Like, how can I turn back the year or the 2 years or whatever? And then realizing I couldn't, it was like this realization of like, okay, you can't go back. It's kind of like now when people say, oh, I would love to go back to, like, 50 years ago, as far as like whatever. And I'm like, you can't go back. Like, you may want that, but this is where you are, and you've kind of like, this is where the times are, this is where you are. So, but it was so funny in the beginning because I was like, okay, I tried this on for size, can I take off this coat now and put on another one? And then
Yes.
realizing that that was the new coat, like,
Yeah. See, that's the whole thing, though. People do not realize that they can try something on.
mhm.
Give it a shot. Play with it a little bit. Have fun. Sometimes it's just so significant. Um, Everything about us is significant. Other people don't understand. They'll never get it. They'll never understand. But the only thing that you can do is examine the practices in your life and see whether or not there's something that's not serving you. And if it's not serving you, it's like what we were talking about before. Noticing that something's missing and noticing that is so much harder than attending to the loudest noise in the room. And more often than not, what's really bothering you isn't the loudest noise in the room, but you have to tone that down to be able to attend at a different level, at a different frequency or wavelength.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, I love that image because I think that if you, and I'm not saying be in pain, like, I never, that's never what I'm professing to people. But if you have a problem that has a root cause, I always tell people if you have like this unbelievable pain in some part of your body, you've got to turn down the volume on that before you can address the misalignment, because the misalignment might take time to go back into, wherever it's supposed to be on a physical level. It might take time for that inflammation to decrease, or for that agitation or discomfort might, you might have to turn that down over time. Whereas if you have but you can't do that until you get out of pain or excruciating pain, because
Right.
there's no space for it. There's like, oh my gosh, I can't function. It's the volume is too loud, you know, so to speak. And I think no matter what it is in our lives, if we're in that place, it's almost like we have to turn, we have to figure out somehow to turn down a little bit what's really loud so that we can hear the stuff that's a little deeper.
Yeah. And I keep thinking as you're talking, the things that we think we're paying attention to is in the domain of what we know.
Mhm.
And so that familiarity, that it's known to us, so therefore we immediately give it a positive or negative, sign, good or bad, or there's just something about it that's familiar, and that familiarity is contemptuous in some cases, as opposed to just flipping the script and saying, well, what is that? Like, what if it's not what I think it is? What if what's really going on here is a really great opportunity for me to learn something that I've stopped before I got to that point any other time in my life? Maybe this would be a good time to just hang there for a minute or two and do a little bit more data gathering, a little bit more like, intentional listening, a little bit more intentional feeling, turn on all six senses for a few minutes.
Well, it's interesting that you said that because I was working with a client the other day um on some yoga therapeutics, and it was really helpful. And so after that, I loved the sequence I was suggesting to her. I thought, okay, I'm going to get on my mat and I'm just going to practice that or for a few moments. And I'm
Right.
just going to breathe for whatever amount of time. Because I've been doing a lot of outdoor meditations and a lot of walking and stuff like that. And it was amazing like I said, it was silent. When I walk, I don't usually have my phone on anyway, but it was silent. It was quiet. It wasn't long. But when I got up, I thought that was the space I needed, literally the space within me that I needed. And if you can do that, it was kind of like, I mean, these are tools I know. But like you said, you forget or you get busy or you do something else or the weather changes. Like, I mean, a zillion things happen. All of a sudden it's a gorgeous day like today is. And I'm like, I don't want to be upstairs in my studio. I want to be outside because tomorrow might be 10, and I'm going to take advantage of the warm weather. So I'm not saying we don't do that, but the question is that when times get really hard, can we remember that? Hey, can we remind ourselves to go back to those, whatever you want to call it, to your toolbox, to your practices, whatever works for you, for a few moments, to just kind of say, okay, I'm just going to say, you, like you said, I'm just going to narrow it down a little bit. I'm just going to like narrow it down in the fact that I'm focusing on my body, my breath, what I hear in the room, what, you know, the temperature of the room, like all the things that kind of bring us so present that we're like, okay, but, and then all of a sudden there's a little bit of space. And it's in that space, like you said, that you find that you get answers. because usually, and the answers are usually different than the ones you thought, are probably almost always different than the ones you thought, or about a lot of time anyway, So my acupuncturist, she used to always say to me when she'd ask me a question, and she could tell I was like all in my head, like I was really, that analytical mind was totally taken over. And she used to say to me, "That's not it." That's all she'd say. And I get so frustrated. I'd be like, "What do you mean that's not it?" And she'd say, "Nope, you're not there."
Yeah, whenever you're in a an environment where people are growing like weeds, and there's people who want to cut corners and like get to the end before everybody else does, because that's just how they do things. And the really, really neat thing that happens every once in a while is somebody around. I mean, when I was doing this uh, deal back in the 1990s with Landmark Education, um, I always got the right answer early. Because I'm an intuitive person. I've got pretty decent intellectual skills, etc. And then they would go, "Okay, so now you've got it like something you know. Now learn how to get it like something you feel."
Mm.
That would just piss me off. The answer, one of the neat things, stories that one of the forum leaders talked with was, yeah, he says, well, when he was in Japan, and they were out at a bar, and there was this group of Japanese uh, musicians, and they were playing "She Loves You," yeah, yeah, yeah. And so afterwards, they go over to that's really great what you played there. That was "She Loves You," yeah, yeah. And the guy said, "Speak no English, speak no English." They had no idea what the words were coming out of their mouth. They were just making it sound like the Beatles. And the listener, these guys that were all in the Air Force, thought that, yeah, we finally got somebody who speaks some English around here. Nah.
Yeah, I think sometimes though, not attaching to the words is actually because that's why I, was talking to a few weeks ago. I did a audio event. We were talking about mantras, and we were talking about, I listened to a lot of through the years. I've listened to a lot of Sanskrit mantras, which are Indian mantras through the years, and there's something about not totally understanding their meaning
Yeah.
because you get trapped in the melody. You know that it's sacred sound. If you have any, if you've done any sort of research at all, they do that. I mean, I really do believe they work off of some vibration that, you know, influences the body in some way, or the mind, body, spirit. But it's really interesting not to understand totally verbatim, like exactly what they mean, to just know that they're kind of well wishing and mesmerizing and beautiful. And, there's something where your mind doesn't actually get involved at all. It's not like I'm sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, like what word does this mean? And what does this mean?" You get much more wrapped up in the melody and the feeling it ensues than the actual translation of
Yeah.
what it means. Even though there are some mantras I do know what they mean, but that's not really why, I would listen to them.
Hmm.
And so it's really interesting if I mean, I used to do all these creative things. I mean, you could have English mantras which are basically phrases of repetition, which people do. They meditate to them or whatever. If you talk about the way you speak to yourself, like, can you say, can you figure out three kind things to say to yourself and then repeat them over and over and over again to
Yeah.
kind of get yourself into a space of calmness and kind of add that element of it. So there is something very powerful in that too. And I've done English mantras through the years. I mean, I have English phrases. I've had them inside my cabinets, on the visor of my car, like I've been through the years. I mean, I've done some really interesting things, put them in my wallet, like anything that was going to like pull it out, go like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, take a deep breath. But
Yeah, I'm hearing your discussion of the need to understand the meaning of these words that you have no idea what they mean. Is it's the same kind of analytical skills you would put into place to analyze a sunset, or a great work of art. I mean,
Exactly.
these things don't have language attached to them. It's, like an all encompassing, every one of your senses being engaged and involved. And the doorway is always going to come in through primarily one of the senses first. And then, the other ones are going to struggle to try to, do some interpretation as well. Because, we're just human, you know, got to make it mean something kind of people, and sometimes there's just nothing there to make it mean. It's just like, how do you feel about it?
Right, and I love the way you said it's like trying to, like, explain exactly a beautiful painting or a beautiful sunset. I
Yeah,
mean, how do you put it into words, but usually words fall short. It's kinda like, you can try to describe, what it's like to hold, like, a newborn baby for or really, let's say, few-day-old baby.
right.
I mean, you could try to describe it, but there's nothing like the words are gonna fall short of the experience of, like, feeling the warmth, actually the touch, like, the way their size, and the fact that, as human beings, I think we look at them and I'm, like, always, like, in awe of how tiny they are, as I, like, we're just and there's something beyond words.
Yeah.
Like, that happens, and so I love the fact that you actually said that because it really reminds me, like, I do energy work on people and it helps when I do something like Reiki. There's something like my brain finally said, "I may not totally understand this, but I don't really need to know this because it really works," And it's something beyond my knowledge base at the moment, and maybe someday they'll be able to explain it, and maybe someday they'll be able to explain it and then realize, like, something else that they were totally wrong, like,
Yeah.
really, something they thought was whatever is really not true, but they didn't have and that's okay, but you attach to the meaning because how often does that happen too, where all of a sudden something is disproved?
Yeah, and the emphasis on the need to know, it's just kind of ingrained into us by the time we're 12 or 13 years old, that how you get ahead in this world is by knowing things, right? However, the knowing of something is not the same as the experience of it. And if that's what you're really going for, is something that's a rich addition, to your sixth sense vocabulary. It's not going to just be words. It's going to be all of the above. The smell of that newborn baby, the talcum powder, the baby lotion, the clean skin, what their hair smells like, right after you've given them a bath, what it feels like while it's still damp and very, wispy, and just that there's an essence that's there, that's just remarkable and miraculous to see those little tiny, shrunken up fingers, with all the little folds in the skin and reaching out. It's just, how do you tell somebody that? You it's almost like being a sighted guide for someone, where
Mhm.
we
I
used
was
to
thinking
drive
the
around.
same thing.
Yeah, when my dad lost his sight, I would drive around with him, and he'd sit in the passenger seat, and then I would describe what we were driving by. Over here is Mike's house. You remember how he used to have, the basketball hoop on the side of the barn, and remember how it had that big sun that was painted on the. I could see him visualizing in his head what I was describing as we were going through his old haunts. Although he had been blind for 4 or 5 years, he hadn't seen any of those sites for better than 20 years, but they were right back there because I was presencing them in language. And then
Mhm.
he would come back with something that he said, "Well, what about the fence on the side of the barn? Is that still there?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, it's still there. It's kind of fallen down now." He said, "Yeah, I would imagine. There's been a lot of time going by." Just the kind of a neat thing when you're describing to another human being in such a way that You really want them to experience it and not just hear you talk about it.
Absolutely. And I love that example because my grandfather was blind. Um, I don't know how many years, but probably a good chunk of I was a child into like young adulthood, so into my 20s. So there were a lot of years where he was, and it was always so funny because he'd get in the car and he could tell you exactly how to go and when to turn. Like there was this uncanny sense of like how far we'd gone,
Yep.
and then he'd say, "You need to make a right turn here." He couldn't see the signs,
Right.
and he could do it by feel, and like just by maybe other things like the sounds of the roads, or maybe he was using things like smell. I mean, I have no idea. But it was always with this kind of touch of amazement that we would all sit there and be like, how didn't he know? How did he know we're now at this street, kind of thing. But there is that, but I love the way you describe, like your father and the fact that like how we can bring someone into that presence and what a gift that is for somebody who, let's say, is kind of, not even kind of, in one way shut out from the world,
Yeah.
is to bring them into, and then kind of emphasizes to me this idea of, when you have something, whether that be, I mean, it could be something that we have. Usually there is something, the other senses become even more powerful. It's like someone who can't see, all of a sudden their sense of hearing kind of amps up, their sense of smell kind
Yep.
of amps up. And so no matter what it is, like we kind of, not in a bad way, but we compensate with other things that we then have because, some of that is a survival mechanism. Because, if we were out in the wild and we weren't able to see, we would have to learn how to use our other senses to protect ourselves or navigate our world. And so, and some of that, like with amazement, the fact that I always look at it as like, oh my gosh, we're pretty amazing creatures. The fact that we do that, that we have. And so, it makes sense that somebody who's very brainy or who extremely bright, I look at the, who I would consider like, when I worked, who were very, sort of emotionally disconnected. It was kind of like their brains had taken over so much that their emotional, like let's say their EQ got very, was not exercised enough. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And not to say that people who are let's say are not necessarily bright. It's just that I think that sometimes, I was explaining that to a student, my client this morning, that if you have a part of the body that's very very flexible, most of the time we go there first. The body's like, oh, this is like, the body's going to take the stretch there. And it kind of forgets about the stretch in other parts of the body. Let's say you're working with your back and you have a tight part to your back, and a part of the back that's much more accessible as far as being able to like arch and round and stuff. It's going to
Right.
go there first. And if you want to have access to the other parts, you got to turn down the volume on that first part, like you were speaking to. You can't, because otherwise you won't ever get to stretch there, because your body is like, oh, okay. And your brain says, oh my gosh, I'm stretching, I'm moving my back. So it's so interesting because the brain automatically says, okay, well, I'm doing it. But that's not the way it works.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing to ponder the number of mundane tasks that we do on a daily basis that could at any moment in our lives occur quite differently than they always do. Just by making a decision to experience it from a different point of view, you know, where just a simple thing like making a cup of coffee, or maybe picking up your phone the first thing in the morning. And I don't know about you, but I have kind of a ritual that I go through depending on what time I get out of bed, I look at all my financial stuff first, just make sure everything's where I left it yesterday, and then I go around and I look for people on social media, and then I go and check on a couple of games that I play to see how those folks are doing. But every once in a while, I will just completely disrupt what my normal routine is. And I'll do something like just getting a glass of water and drinking 8 ounces of water with nothing else before I have my first cup of coffee. Just something to kind of disrupt the usualness of it. And when I change one part, it has the effect of changing everything else I do after that too. And there's also this kind of feeling that's a little bit unnerving because things aren't quite the way that I'm used to them being, right?
Well, for a long time when I used to like, and even do it now when I walk quite a bit, is if I'm used to going in one direction, I
Yeah.
actually go in the opposite direction purposefully, like, especially if it's a loop. I mean, the sun shines differently. It's really a different experience.
Yeah.
And so I used to do that intentionally, thinking to myself, because I think we get into habits with everything. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, I always have the habit of leaving my house and turning right. Well, what happens if I go out and I turn left? And just starting to look at other ways in your life where you might have certain habits. And it's very interesting to start to look at things from in that new perspective. I mean, you could look at it seasonally. I mean, I always loved winter hiking because you could actually see through the trees and there were no leaves on them. So in some ways it was harder because it was colder, but in other ways I got vistas or things I saw that I never got to see if the foliage was too dense.
Right.
So there was this whole new experience by like going out, and all of a sudden I could see nests and trees because they weren't covered by leaves, or I could see bodies of water that I wasn't able to see because they were blocked, and all the different things. And it's sometimes I think training ourselves in those ways to kind of mix it up a little bit. I think that that's why travel is fun, because travel kind of takes you out of your normal routine. And I think it's also why I did a lot of growing when I moved. That was like a huge growth experience for me, as opposed to living in the same place for 30 years.
I understand. The true story is we've lived in this house since 1978,
Mm-hmm.
but we've also owned 7 or 8 other second homes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a 2-week period when we were schlepping our cats around, uh, where we stayed in 3 different homes in Connecticut. And then we went to Florida and we stayed in 4 different homes down there with the cats. And on the trip down, we stop at a motel with them. And so we'd get all their stuff set up in the bathroom, and then we'd close the door because one of the cats had this knack of crawling underneath the bed. And a lot of these hotels have this metal thing that goes all the way around, except for up by the headboard. And in order to get the cat out, you had to lift the mattresses up, step inside of this foundation, and pick the darn cat up. So it got to the point where we were calling wherever we stayed the latest bathroom, right? And these kitty cats have seen more bathrooms in the last 2 weeks. So making a game out of it and having some fun. I really I appreciate this whole opportunity to sort of cleanse whatever aftertaste is here from 2024 and maybe enjoy it one last time, because good, bad, or indifferent, it's in the rearview mirror now.
I love that. I should share with everyone this poem that this is about going into the new year, but I, based on that, it just, um, it's called With Intention. Maybe we'll end there, Bill,
I like it.
and we can just close. So it says, with intention. And what will you do with this unspent year? These 365 never before days, unspooling from the wheel as it turns, neither stopping nor hurrying, despite your self driven pace. Will you greet each one with heart wide open, seeing all the beauty of this world as well as its infinite sadness, the madness and grief woven into the achingly exquisite texture of a day? Will you pause in your haste for each busy day to be done, for the next special event to arrive, so that you might taste any moment now, be it bitter, fresh, rich, or bland, and let it roll across your tongue so that you truly know it? Each new day will never again be here. Greet it without clinging or aversion, or worse, without noticing. As intimate and near to you as your breath. Unwrap each day as the gift it is. Be surprised with delight or with disappointment, but do not look away too long, for this one will not come to you again. By Janice
Thank-
Falls.
Yeah, nice. I especially like the taste simile.
I just thought it was beautiful. Like, but worse is the not noticing.
Yes.
I just loved that, based on our original kind of the way we opened, was like, could we notice? And so that attention is like, that would be the worst thing of all, is to not notice it. Mm.
That's a pretty good place to hang it up.
Hang it up.
Yes.
Oh, goodness. Thank you, Bill, for an amazing hour, and for and give a shout out to both of us for kind of, showing up each week and, sharing the light as we can.
It has been the year that was, no doubt about it. We've covered the beach on different experiences this year together, that's for sure. And I look back on it with much fondness in terms of how we've grown our relationship with each other, and all the work that you and I have done together. And work, as far as I'm concerned, is the purest form of self-expression. And I think we've had some great conversations, my friend.
So how should we leave our wonderful audience today?
Would you like to invite anybody to do anything this week?
Oh, yeah, I guess the thing is, like, pay attention. Like, we have, start, you can start today, or commit to maybe starting on New Year's Day, and get up and just look at each day as that gift, and just whatever it is, just notice something.
I love it. And for the last time in 2024, we're going to ask you to do something really special for yourself and someone you love. Could you reach out, email, telephone, call, text message? I like to say carrier pigeon, or note wrapped around a rock through the front window. Maybe you don't want to do that, but just reach out to somebody that you love and let them know the world works for you, because they are in it. And that if they ever need you, you're only a text or a phone call away. So with that in mind, God bless us for 2024. It was a year. And here's to the best 2025 we could ever envision and actually experience.
Absolutely.
Bye for now, my friend. I love you madly, and I can't wait to love you more in the next year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.